Her mood was rather somber for some time after. Kamakura-kun did not attempt to speak to her, merely observing as always. But when 2 days had passed, Chiaki decided, more than anything else, that she had to get better. She owed it to her friends. Maybe she couldn't do anything now but wait for that program to be ready, but getting back on her feet would at least make her feel better, and maybe it would open up new opportunities. Who knew? Of course, in her condition, it wasn't that easy. Okay, let's try this again. Kamakura-kun's face was blank as he answered, Whenever you're ready. Chiaki inhaled. Like ripping off a band-aid, she reminded herself, and before she could psych herself out, pushed herself up and out of her wheelchair. Her muscles screamed in protest. The room immediately swayed beneath her feet. Chiaki didn't make the mistake of stretching her arms to reorient her center of gravity. The last time she attempted to lift them and focus on standing had proven too much and sent her toppling to the floor. It took all her concentration just to keep her balance as it was. Hold it! Hold it! Despite her efforts, she felt herself start to fall backwards, and her hand immediately shot out and grabbed Kamakura-kun's arm. He was a steadying presence, solid and strong, and once she had a hold of him, she felt her equilibrium reassert itself. But the point of this exercise wasn't to not fall, it was to keep her stability for as long as possible without holding on to him. She didn't know how long she'd managed, but she had a sneaking suspicion it wasn't as long as she'd wanted. Without letting go of the Ultimate Hope's arm, Chiaki lowered herself back into her wheelchair, feeling her legs shake. How long was that? 5 seconds, Kamakura-kun informed her, and she grimaced. She'd be lying if she said she didn't feel a bit irked. Despite all the stretches and exercises she'd been doing, the only improvement she'd made in the 3 weeks since she'd learned what had happened to her friends was that she could push her wheelchair around the house and grip objects. While she was extremely happy to be able to hold her precious video game consoles again, she wished she could just stop being so weak already. She could stand if she had something to support herself with, usually Kamakura-kun, but she couldn't yet stand on her own, much less walk, and she still relied on his help for many things. Still, progress was progress, and if she'd once spent an entire day grinding against the bionic Kraken for the 1 out of 128th drop chance of getting the Gutsy Bat without screaming, she could spend however long it took to relearn walking.
She just needed to stay positive. Wasn't her motto, if you just do it, things will turn out okay after all?
That's right. It's frustrating now, but I'm sure to relearn it all in time. It's just grinding my skills back up. If I'm patient and try as hard as I can, I'll get there eventually. I have to, for my friends. I lose again, huh? Chiaki leaned back, placing the controller on her lap. It had been several days since then, and she'd slowly been adding several more seconds to her record. On the TV screen, the words, Ken wins! Flashed in bold red letters. Ryu lay in an unceremonious heap on the ground, while a grinning Ken flashed the V sign in celebration of his victory. His reaction could not be any more the opposite of his player's, who was as expressionless as ever. As expected, was all Kamakura-kun said. How predictable. Chiaki glanced at him, biting her lip. Learning to hold things again had made her feel much more confident about her ability to do multiplayer, so the very day she'd remastered it, she'd persuaded Kamakura-kun into playing video games with her. He had needed to run out to get second consoles and controllers, apparently he'd only thought to pack one for each platform, from the nearby town first, but once he had, the afternoon schedule shifted. When the morning therapies and lunch were done, the two would settle down to play. While Chiaki was concerned about her classmates, she wasn't going to neglect Kamakura-kun. She'd said she'd be his friend, and she'd meant it. It didn't matter what Chiaki picked, though. RPGs, shooters, strategies, puzzles, Kamakura-kun always beat her. She didn't mind. Trying to beat him or his scores actually gave her a goal to work towards. But she worried that it bored him. It gave her a newfound empathy for how Hinata-kun must have felt when he'd played with her, and she again wished she'd been able to reassure him better. So she leapt into each game determined to be as challenging an opponent as possible so Kamakura-kun would get even a little enjoyment out of it. And maybe, someday, she'd even beat him. Wouldn't that surprise him? Though sometimes things went a little differently. Sometimes, instead of playing, he asked her about their past together, and they'd sit down, and she would spend the afternoon telling him stories of her time with Hinata-kun. Chiaki hoped she'd maybe jog his memory, but his face remained impassive throughout. Then he'd be more interested in asking about her part in those events than his. Why did she act a certain way here? Why did she say this there? It sometimes seemed he wanted to microanalyze her, especially with how intently his eyes peered into hers. Hinata-kun's eyes had sometimes been sharp like that too. Shaking away the sudden surge of wistfulness, Chiaki turned and gave him a bright smile. That was a good match, Kamakura-kun. It was so close. I actually thought I'd beat you this time, if you hadn't pulled that combo at the end. He chose not to respond, placing his controller down and rising. Chiaki twisted in her wheelchair, watching him head to the kitchen to start making dinner, not at all bothered by his silence. So, did you enjoy this one at all? It was the same thing she always asked him after each game, and his answer was always the same each time. No. Well, we'll try another game tomorrow, she said conversationally as she rolled after him, leaving the TV on. You brought a lot. I'm sure we'll find one you like eventually. I doubt that. They all bore me. But those are just the ones we've played so far, she insisted. There has to be one out there you'd enjoy, and I won't stop until we find it. He turned slightly, eyes narrowed by a margin. Why are you so invested in this? The corners of her mouth tugged down unhappily. Because you're my friend, and it's no good for me to be the only one enjoying our time together. You need to, too. That is impossible. Everything bores me. There was a pause, filled in only by the sounds of him cutting up vegetables. However, it is less boring to play games with you. Your company is interesting, so that makes boring things tolerable. She brightened. Really? He gave her a flat look, clearly indicating that he didn't see the point in restating the obvious. Well, I'll do my best to keep things interesting for you, and I won't give up on finding something you like either. She rolled up to his side. So, pass me the plates. I'll set the table.
At the end of July, Kamakura-kun deemed she was able to stand well enough to start learning how to walk again.
He placed a cane in her hands, showed her how to use it, and after seeing she could hold it properly, stepped back to let her try. Walking took so much more effort than you'd think. The muscles in one leg had to contract, order it to rise, then they had to pull it up, forward, and down. Your other leg had to hold the weight of your entire body while this was happening. To do that, you had to keep your balance, a task that proved very hard when your muscles were as weak as hers. She could stand on her own just fine, if not for more than a few minutes, but even with the cane, she crumpled as soon as she attempted to lift her leg for that one step. The cane fell out of her hands and clattered on the floor. Kamakura-kun swooped in and easily caught her before she could follow it. He helped her back into the wheelchair, his hands lingering on her waist for a fraction of a second before retreating. Chiaki blinked back embarrassed tears, keeping her head low so he wouldn't notice. He did anyway, of course. Why are you crying? I can't walk, she choked out. We've been working to get this for weeks, and I can't walk. You will, he said, and anyone else would have tried to be reassuring, but his inflection was no different than normal. Ironically, that actually made Chiaki feel a bit better. It came across as him just stating a fact, rather than attempting to pacify her. Wiping away her tears, she nodded and got ready to try again. By the end of the session, she hadn't managed more than a single step. But to Chiaki, who hadn't even been able to stand not that long ago,
that step was hope.
End of Chapter 6. Author's note. We never actually get a clear picture of just how bad the world was during the tragedy. Yeah, Junko says it completely fell apart, but Junko lies a lot. I mean, TV is still around for her to be broadcasting the killing game on, and if the world has running electricity, it's not in completely terrible shape. And the Gaiden manga Killer Killer shows that within a year of Junko's death, towns have been rebuilt and several industries, manga, entertainment, idol, are back in business. So it's unlikely that there was a total destruction of civilization. Hence Izuru's statement that some, admittedly remote, parts are still managing fine. Next chapter, fluff, more walking, and we finally get to see the outside world.